we're going to continue with our next guest speaker. And I've been waiting for her to come all day. I'm so happy to have Dr. Trinitia Cannon with us. She has a wonderful personal story to tell. I've known Trinitia for several years now. She actually was an associate professor here in the Department of ENT, head and neck surgery here at University of Oklahoma. But she is now an associate professor in the Department of Otolaryngology, head and neck surgery at Duke University Health Systems. And her background is in head and neck cancer and in complex microvascular reconstruction. She actually was a nurse before she went into her medical school training at UNC. And she also, or actually I should say that was at University of Rochester, New York, and then UNC was general surgery, her research fellowship, and then her residency in otolaryngology, head and neck surgery. She also did a fellowship at the Medical University of South Carolina, head and neck surgical oncology and microvascular reconstruction. And she is head of the fellowship program there at Duke. And I am just so happy to have her. She has a very compelling, strong story of her own that I wanted her to share with you today. And it's entitled Traveling the Distance, My Journey to Medicine. Welcome, Dr. Cannon. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an honor. As you know, we've been trying to coordinate one of these symposiums for a couple of years now. And so I'm very delighted and honored that I can be with you all today. I'm actually in Pinehurst, North Carolina, because we have our faculty retreat this year that starts at about 6 p.m. tonight. So I drove down early just to be with you all and to get set up. Let me share my screen and I will get started. Can you all see my talk?
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you again for having me. It is an incredible honor. Dr. Allen has been an incredible mentor to me during my time when I was at OU, and it was bittersweet for me to leave OU and to head to North Carolina. As she stated, my talk today will be about sort of my journey in medicine and how it intertwines with diversity and what many of us underrepresented and minority in medicine residents, fellow students, and physicians go through along our journey and what we have to contend with. I will interweave a little bit of that with my life's journey to get a better understanding of that. I am a consultant for Cook Medical, but as this is a non-clinical talk, I won't be talking about anything related to this company at all. What we actually see in the professional gap is that many non-underrepresented minorities in academia, whether that administrators, physicians, learners do not recognize or understand the challenges that we face matriculating through medical school, residency, and as faculty members. And what we'd like to see is that those of us who don't share our journey will actually recognize and understand the challenges that we face along sort of every aspect of our career. So my learning objectives today is I want to just describe some of the challenges of underrepresented minorities face as they navigate the path in their careers in medicine. I want to relate that to the various experiences that we all encounter in academia and explain the distinct advantages of hiring people of color and in contrast them with the disadvantages of maintaining a predominantly white healthcare institution. So again, diversity in my personal experience. And you'll get to probably hear a little bit more about myself, maybe more than what you want to know. So me as a little one with my mom here, and actually my stepdad, my father passed away fairly young from pancreatic cancer. And surprisingly, I don't have a lot of pictures of him, so I can't show him, and that's pretty sad. But I was born and raised in Warren, Ohio. It's a tiny little town outside of Cleveland in the northeastern aspect of Ohio, and a tight-knit community that I was born into. I have three other siblings. I have an older brother and an older sister, and I have a younger sister. And we were mostly a lower middle class neighborhood. But at the time, I obviously didn't know what that meant. And all I knew is that I grew up in a fairly loving home that had a lot of problems. I can tell you that I don't know one person in my family who does not suffer from alcoholism, aside from myself and my brother. I mean, every aspect, if I look at my mom, my dad, my grandparents on both my mom's and my dad's side, sister, older sister, younger sister, there was somebody in my life at some point in time going through extreme alcoholism. And I mean extreme alcoholism. That's what I saw when I was growing up. Everybody was a heavy drinker, not big time partiers, but my mom would drink for days and days on end. When she was not drinking, she was a loving and caring mom. But that also meant that there was no expectation set for our future. I know that my brother and sister, my older brother and sister before me graduated high school, but there was no expectation on their grades. I remember seeing mostly B's and F's on their report cards, and they never got talked to about it. Nobody checked their homework when I came home. So it was my own ability to actually love school and the desire to please people, I think, along the way, that sort of set up my construct for doing well for myself. I was in no ways a straight A student in high school, and oftentimes a bit of a troublemaker in high school, getting into lots of fights and things like that. And at some point, didn't think I was actually going to graduate high school. At 15, I got pregnant. Obviously not a planned pregnancy, but it was a big impact. I think that I was the first student in my high school to actually have a baby, and they didn't know what to do with me. I was, at that time, I'd been on the cheerleading team for a few years. I was asked at that time that I was not a role model, so that I needed to step down and step away from being a cheerleader. And they wanted to take me out of the high school and put me into an alternative school, is what they called it. They wanted to hide me away. They didn't want that social impact on the rest of the girls that were there. I can tell you that I fought very, very hard. My mom did too, to keep me in the high school so that I could graduate with my peers and be among my own people. And I fought also equally hard to rejoin the cheerleading team when I was there. I can tell you that my fight for staying in school and my fight for the cheerleading squad were both good efforts. After I got back on the cheerleading squad, I quit because I didn't want to be around people who didn't want me to be part of their group. I know we probably know all of these statistics, that 30% of teenage girls drop out of school, cite pregnancy and parenthood as the key reasons for not attending. My own mom didn't graduate high school. She got pregnant at 16. And with her mom being an alcoholic and nobody to watch her child, she wasn't able to complete school. 40% of teen mothers, only 40% of teen mothers finished high school. Less than 2% finished college by the age of 30. Children of teen mothers perform worse on many measures throughout high school, and 50% are more likely to repeat a grade, and obviously more likely to just drop out of high school altogether. And so this is what I was facing at the age of 15 till the time I graduated. I can tell you that even though I'd never really talked to anybody about what I wanted to be or what I wanted to do, I can tell you how many people came to me and come up to me and would just shake their head and say, well, I guess you messed up your future. Oh, we thought you were going to be the one that did something with yourself, and here you are. And so I had that stereotype labeled on my back for many, many years. I can tell you that it took a lot for me to start thinking about how to break this curse that was laid on me, how to get out of the situation that I was in. And I was a bit stumped by this dilemma, as I didn't have any resources. My parents didn't go to college. I didn't know anything about even applying for school. And so it took a lot for me to sort of break away from old friends, to develop my own aspects and figure it out. I can tell you that one of the things that I did was got a job. I got a job at McDonald's. I walked into McDonald's and talked to Guido, who was the manager at the time. And I just said, look, I need a job. I have a kid and I need to work. And he said, when can you start? I said, today. The neighbor across the street agreed to watch my son for me while I finished school. She barely took any pay from me because she just wanted me to do well. Ultimately, I met this young man who's in the center, who was only 16 at the time. And, you know, it's interesting to have a 16-year-old young man be the very first person in your life to actually ask you what you want to do with your life. And so Corey, who ultimately became my future husband, we're no longer together, but he's still a very good friend of mine to this day. We would sit for hours and talk about what I wanted to do and how I would get there. He was from Syracuse, New York. His mom happened to move to Ohio to be with family a few years before. He would come down and visit, and we met along the way. During that time, we talked about distance to school. There was no schools within an hour plus of me, and I didn't have a car at the time. So one of the things he said was that, you know, if you move to Syracuse with me, we could actually take buses to school, and there's 3 or 4 schools in the Syracuse area right away. So, you know, right after I graduated high school, I left everything behind and I moved to Syracuse, New York to be with this young man, and we developed a plan for our future. I can tell you that when I got there, my son was still young and I could not afford childcare by any means. So we decided to hold off on getting into college until my son started kindergarten. And that was the plan. In the meantime, I continued to work. I did my research on the schools that were around there. And my daily motivation at this time was the fact that if I looked out my 3rd store apartment tower window, I faced the State University of New York's campus at Syracuse. And every day I saw white coats tramping across campus. And I knew that that was my dream. And so I would do my work and I would watch the white coats walk across campus. And I kept that in mind throughout my entire journey. When it came time for me to actually apply for school, though, I went down to a college, and I decided that I would go to nursing school first, mostly because I just needed a job. I was on public assistance. We spent a lot of time in food lines. At the time, I had no furniture in my house. I slept on the floor of my 3rd floor apartment. And I just wanted to work. I didn't want to be a burden to anybody. And I was just trying to figure out how I could go to school, get a job really quick, but still maintain my path. And the nursing school, actually, I applied to was a 2-year associate's degree, and I would have my RN's license at the time. I went and applied, and when I tell you, they laughed. They pretty much giggled at me. They asked me all sorts of questions. They wanted to know what my support system was for my son, who was going to watch him when I was in school, how long had it been since I attended school? Did you know that this program was very rigorous, and it's even hard for people who just graduated to go through this nursing program? And I don't think that somebody who hasn't been to school in 4 to 5 years could actually get through this program. So, you know, I bowed my head and I walked away, and we came up with another plan. And so the other plan was for me to attend the community college, to sort of get back into the role of actually being in school and working and doing everything that I needed to do. So I attended Onondaga Community College for about 2 years. And I made the dean's list every year that I was there. And after 2 years, I walked back into nursing school and I set my grades down and I said, I applied again, and to their credit, they let me in after I proved that I was capable of doing that. I can tell you that in 1995, from nursing school I graduated from, I earned the top medal award that year for nursing in their state New York's Medal of Excellence in Nursing School. And then I was sort of on my way to the next role in my life. Like I said, nursing school was an interesting time for me. I was on public assistance while I was attending nursing school, and that was just a tough role. And I don't know if any of you have ever been on public assistance, but it's pretty humiliating to go down there and constantly be begging for things that you need, getting food stamps, having people standing in line with people who you didn't feel like you belonged with. And so I kept inquiring about different alternatives to help. And at the time they developed this new program called the CAPS program, a child assistance program. And it was designed to take people who were highly motivated and get them through school by any means necessary. They would provide your clothing, your uniforms, your books, anything that you needed to get through school. All you had to do was ask. And I was assigned my very own caseworker. His name was Kevin Tucker. And it was the first time that I felt like in my life I was being treated with some dignity. And Kevin Tucker was such a mentor to me that me and Kevin are still friends to this day. And he's pretty much attended most of my graduations along the way because he was helpful in that endeavor for me. I can tell you that even in nursing school, people didn't understand what it was like being underrepresented in medicine at that time. There was a time in class where we were taking a course on bathing patients. And, you know, so I think this is relatively simple, having this conversation. There was 3 of us who were Black in the class. All 3 of us were women. This young lady in this picture to my right was one of them. And we were taking this class and the teacher is talking about bathing people. And one of the sentences that she said was that if you happen to be bathing a Black or brown person, and the water turns dark, don't worry, they're not dirty. It's just their skin coming off. And I can remember just looking at Kendra and Renee, and we both stared at each other like, are they serious right now? And so, no, we raised our hand and I was like, no, I promise you that if the water turns dark, it probably means that they were dirty. And it was the first time I think that they had really had Black people sort of in their class and sort of getting that perspective of things from a medical side of things. And it was amazing from then how many questions we got about Black and brown patients just in general. I had the decision to go to Syracuse, New York, or a tiny Jesuit college named Lemoyne College. And I thought that I would want something smaller, just for my life and not wanting to be lost in a class. And I knew I was going to have some challenges. Math wasn't my strongest. I was going to need some tutoring when it came to things like physics and chemistry. And so I wanted some personal connections. So I applied to and got into Lemoyne's College. In addition, after a few years, I was invited to become one of their people in their special honors program. And the specials honors program was something that they set up where you stayed in one class and all the teachers came to you and you actually got taught by all of the professors all at one time. So my history, my chemistry, my physics, they were in one class with us. And we did everything all from a different perspective to them. I thought that that was an amazing experience. And as you can see, I was the only Black person in that class. But when I tell you that Lemoyne was pretty much the most supportive school that I have ever been to, I worked at this time. I worked as a nurse because I had already graduated and I took a job like I promised. And I worked 40 hours a week and I went to school every day. I did the 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift. And every morning I was in class before 8 o'clock. And in class all day. And my son was at home with his father, but oftentimes when his job conflicted, I would just bring him to class. I never asked anybody, never inquired about it. And the teacher at Lemoyne never blinked. Bring him in class, I set him down in the back, give him some crayons and things, and he would just be quiet and sit there and work, and nobody ever said anything. I pretty much had the most support that I can think of from the school, and they've always been sort of pretty honorable to me. So when we think about disadvantages of underrepresented in medicine people who work in white healthcare institutions, we often find that students and faculty find themselves underrepresented alone. They often experience emotional discomfort resulting from heightened visibility, the tendency to judge themselves as representative of their race. And I think many of you can understand what this feels like. You just feel like if you mess up, you're messing up for anybody who needs to apply after you. And so you're trying to do your best to work as hard as you can to do a good job. There's effects of ethnic or racial stereotyping. I think even to this day, I get the angry Black woman experience if I even raise my tone or do anything, which I don't see in my other counterparts. And there's often an experience of social isolation that comes along with being the only. When we look at percentages of US medical school matriculants by race and ethnicity, and this data is from 2010 and 2011, you can see, as expected, the great majority of people with the lighter blue color being 2010 and the darker blue in 2011 were white matriculants, around 57, 58% of the matriculants at that time. Hispanics represented 8.2, 8.5%. Black and African Americans represented 6.3 and 6.1%. I know that they've done a lot of studies now stating that the numbers are increasing, but when you look at the increase in those numbers as represented by societal norms and increases in populations across the country, in actuality, there hasn't really been a big shift in the percentages of underrepresented minorities in medicine to this date. The reason why, there are lots of barriers to recruitment. I hear it to this day. I hear students who want to go into ENT, for example, are often turned away. Same application, same board source, same level of research. Somebody is telling them that they can't get in. And I don't know where that comes from. That we see that on the undergrad level. We see it almost at every level. They're being turned away and offered different positions. It happened to me right through the middle of my undergrad, great scores, honors student. I was told that I should apply to the PA program and not to the medical school program, that it was a new program, I would do great. And honestly, I had almost considered it. But again, listening and thinking about those little white coats walking down the street was the vision that I had in mind for myself. And so I turned that down. What are some of the barriers that we face? Now, I obviously won't read this very busy slide, but there's usually what we see is low MCAT scores, low undergraduate GPAs, and as rationales for why there are barriers to recruitment. Not having parents understand the process of getting somebody applied on time and in school, not having the mentors who can step up and help us throughout this process, lack of financial aid or not wanting to put ourselves in debt, no role models to look up to and look into. I know that just the sheer number of people that I met along my journey will tell me that they didn't even think medical school was possible for them. They had never seen a Black doctor. I hear that so much along my journey, and I still find it astounding that throughout this time that I've been doing this, these are the most common things that I see. What I can tell you is that even when we're promoting and talking about students who deserved a spot, maybe everything on their CV is perfect except for their board scores or their MCAT scores, for which we all know the rationales for why they're low. Other people still think that that is a form of affirmative action. What they don't talk about, though, is the non-minority versions of this who get in through legacy programs and things like that, which is another form of affirmative action that is often not mentioned and not talked about. And when you think about the number of people who probably get into these Ivy League schools, top schools or programs secondary to legacy versus affirmative action, I bet the legacy programs win overall. And so when I come back to my experience, was the same. I had lack of finances to travel to interviews. I couldn't afford, I'd never even been on a plane before at this point in my lifetime. Didn't even know how to do that. Nobody that I knew had ever been on a plane before. So I just only applied to the few schools that were around me: Syracuse, Buffalo, Albany, Rochester. That was it. That's all I applied for. I can tell you that I had no mentorship. I had never been on an interview, never had a job that was required for me to wear a suit before in my life. Didn't even know that that was something you're supposed to do. I showed up to my first medical school interview in a nice long pink skirt and silk shirt, and I was the only one not wearing a suit, a black suit or a blue suit and tie of some sort. And I can tell you that in between interviews, I would just go into the bathroom because I knew that I felt and looked out of place. But outside of that bathroom, I just held my head up high and just went through everything that I could go through to show as much confidence in the process as I could. There's a lot of intimidation and a lot of lack of understanding about that, lots of research, but every time somebody sent me away with an assignment, I did the assignment and I came right back. I didn't have time to study for the exam. I was working 40 hours a week. I was raising my son. I was going to school. I was cooking. I was cleaning like any other mom and wife. And I had very little time to study, let alone money to take a Kaplan review course. As such, my MCAT scores weren't the highest. I didn't have a full resume. Other people were volunteering at clinics and building their CVs. And my CV basically said that I was a mom, but it did not deter me from applying. And out of the 4 medical schools that I applied to, I got waitlisted at 3 and into 1. And that one school was the University of Rochester at the School of Medicine. I had a great experience I'm going to back up if I can. I had a great experience at the University of Rochester. Very supportive environment. Dr. Tana Grady-Willicke, who is robing me at my graduation ceremony, is no longer with us, but a very supportive dean. There was probably about 7 underrepresented minorities out of a class of 100, and you're looking at a few of them up here. A couple of the ladies aren't in my class, but they were in other classes, and we had our own bond and our own way of getting through things. And I felt very supported at that school, and I felt seen at that school. And it was tough. It was a hard journey, one that I just sort of had to buckle down into and put my head down. And I just, like everything else in life, I wasn't afraid to raise my hand. I wasn't afraid to ask questions, even if they seemed embarrassing, even if I felt like I didn't know anything. And I did everything in my sights to get through, and I graduated. And I set my sights on being an ENT resident. I can tell you that everybody said that was not going to happen for me. There was no way that was happening. And I had low board scores again, and you had to have a certain number of interviews in order to guarantee a spot. I can tell you that based on my low board scores, my lack of research, my lack of everything, I applied to every program in the country that I could apply to. And I got only, maybe 4 or 5 interviews out of applying to every program in the country. And I was told, just give up. Once you don't match, it's going to be so much harder to match anyplace else. And it was truly the only thing that I wanted to do. And so I, once again, put my head down, and I just decided, I looked up every program that I really, truly wanted to live. I could see myself living there and working there. And I looked up each program. I found both the chair's email and the program director's email, and I wrote my own personal email to them. And that email basically said, I bet you never even opened my application. I'm sure you screened me out based on my board scores, but had you opened my application, this is what you would have learned about me. I can tell you that probably at about the other 20 programs that I applied to, I ended up getting 6 more interviews out of that. And one of them was at my favorite institution, which I wanted to go to as my #1 spot, which was the University of North Carolina. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. So what are the benefits of increasing the pool of underrepresented minorities in trainings in academia? Again, it does some of the benign things. It provides a pool of mentors for students, for them to see us and to be seen, to better serve patients. I have patients to this day that say, I sought you out just because you were a Black woman. To make the medical center more diverse and an interesting place, to bring different points of view to debates, and to provide a pool of researchers and clinical investigators who bring a different perspective to their scholarly activities, which we all know that we truly need in this day and age. And so again, I had challenges coming into this, applying. I can tell you that when I was applying for residencies, my nursing background was actually a hindrance to me. I was told that nurses follow orders, they don't give orders, doctors give orders. How would I be able to switch my mindset from one to the other? Again, I had very little ability to travel for these interviews that I received, and I was scraping up money from here and there, taking out extra loans to do all of this. Again, like I said, I got advised already to not even do it and to apply for other programs. I had very few mentors along the way and absolutely no minority mentors that were in ENT. The gentleman in here is my former chairman in my residency program, and still to this day, my biggest sponsor on the entire planet. When he received my email, he called me on the phone personally. He said, can you come to UNC this weekend? I was in Rochester, again, a broke student, and I said, yes, I will be there this weekend. When I tell you that when I arrived on UNC's campus, people were like, Dr. Pillsbury was whooping and hollering when you agreed to come to this interview this weekend. I was the only person there interviewing. He sat me down and asked me what my dreams were, what my goals were, and we had a decent conversation. And he told me that I would need to do a 7-year residency program with 2 years of research in order to catch up with my peers and to be on the same path as them when I applied to fellowships. And I struggled with that. I was an older student. I had, needed to get out and get a job. From my perspective, I didn't see myself doing a fellowship. I just wanted to get through this residency and get to work doing what I wanted to do. But when I went home and sat and thought about it, I thought, he's right. This has been a struggle, and it's time for me to stop struggling, to catch up with my peers. So I took him up on his offer to do the 7-year program, which at that time was brand new and it wasn't in the match. So he could offer it to me that day. And I took that spot there. I can tell you that when I talk about a champion of diversity, he was that person. He was the person, our class, I had never seen more Black or brown people in one class in my life. One program. I was the second, only the second in maybe 15 years, Black person that had started the residency program, the first African-American female. But after my year, he took it upon his major goal to have 1 to 2 underrepresented minorities in every program. He would ask me my opinions of people who came in, who I thought deserved a spot, took my opinions to heart. If I really liked somebody or thought that they were somebody who could be in the program, he would offer them a position. And by the end of my residency program, I thought all residency programs looked like that. I had no idea what we were unique along the way. Chapel Hill was a great experience for me, and he was right. When it came time for me to apply for fellowships, they were knocking on my door after I did my 2 years in the lab and had wrote many papers during that time and developed an animal model. But I came out of UNC into an environment that I was not prepared for. I was again this is my fellowship at the Medical University of South Carolina. And once again, I was in an environment where I was the only one. What I can tell you about my experience here is that they were phenomenal. This is probably a year after I graduate, and this picture was taken, the one on the fireplace was taken maybe 10 years later when we do our annual ski trip. I just went skiing with these guys in Mammoth, California just recently, and we do something every year. And my boss, which is the one in the far left of the screen, and the second one who has his hand on my shoulder, are also big sponsors for my career and my life. Just about every program or committee that I've been involved with, through societies I've been promoted for by them. And so in the world of academia, underrepresented faculty often experience feelings of invalidation, othering, unequal treatment, microaggressions, macroaggressions, overt racism. And I've experienced all of that throughout my time period, as many of you likely have. You're looking at a picture of Dr. Rebecca Lee Crumpler, who, like me, started off as a nurse in the 1800s and then became one of the first Black female physicians of her time. So let's talk a little bit about Black women of color in medicine and this intersectionality that we experience. We often bear emotional burden and face obstacles to success that the majority faculty do not. We often have negative messages tied to both our gender and our race. And so we experience it from both ends. For women of color, gender intersects with race, and it creates this special experience that for oftentimes, a lot of my colleagues have low self-confidence and feelings of invalidation that is kind of hard to overcome. And so when we talk about diversity, there are lots of benefits, as you can read on the graph beside us. Behavioral studies show that a team of diverse individuals often operate with increased creativity, promotes cross-cultural competence, increased comfort levels, and it goes on and on. So it is very important for us to promote inclusivity and diversity in our universities. We often, as underrepresented minorities, pay what we call the minority tax. It's all of the extra duties and expectations that come along with promotion of other underrepresented minorities. And we're often asked to do this, often without any extra pay, extra time outside of work that takes away sometimes from the things that allow us to get promoted, research, publications, but we do it because we know exactly how important this is. And so I left the University of Oklahoma in 2019 and I went to Duke, and part of that was I needed to see more people that look like me on the campus. Dr. Allen can attest that there are very little of us that are walking around, and as a single Black woman in a sea of non-minorities, I was feeling the impact of that after a while. And so I left and went back to North Carolina, where there are a lot of other underrepresented minorities. And I instantly found my tribe here. Within no time at all, I have a group of friends and colleagues that look like me along the way. And so when you look at the healthcare demographics, it's often the same. 2/3 are Christian, 3/4 are white, 2/3 are male. The majority are from affluent, higher socioeconomic backgrounds. And after a while of sitting around and listening to the conversations and feeling that, you can't help but to be impacted by it psychologically along the way. What else do we find when we see homogeny in our healthcare? That it can be dangerous. It disproportionately affects some patients more than others. We know that minorities receive worse care. We know that oftentimes in papers that we write, we blame it on race when it's mostly just the care that they receive in terms of fewer recommended treatments, worse outcomes, and the other socioeconomic factors. We know that people of color are more likely to die from things like diabetes. Women are more likely to die from breast cancer compared to their counterparts. And most of the time it's short-sightedness in thinking, and mostly because we lose the opportunity to learn from one another. We know that there's impact to having people that look like us in medicine to help us meet the impending healthcare needs of the growing diverse society that we are in. We want people like us to serve in underdeserved and underrepresented communities. They'll likely choose things like primary care and family practice as a specialty and care for people who don't have as much as others. Most likely receptive to people from other cultures. And I think it overall improves active thinking, intellectual engagement, social skills, empathy, and racial understanding. And so the goal is always to find your mentors, your tribe, your colleagues. They don't necessarily have to look like you. or think like you, but they have to be able to see beyond their biases. So these were some of the mentors that I encountered in my time along the way who have helped me to achieve my goals. But you also have to find your community too. These were my friends in Oklahoma when I lived there, and these were my impact community. They kept me sane, they kept me straight, they kept me from being, stir crazy along the way. And I had to shift oftentimes from work mode to friend mode. But I found my tribe when I was there, and I found my tribe in North Carolina. My family also keeps me grounded. This is my son who lives in Oklahoma, so I often get back often to see him. And this is now my going on 3-year-old grandson, who is a delight, now taking swimming lessons and is fearless and jumping in the water, which is often sometimes pretty scary. So in conclusion, this is what a doctor looks like. And so we see those hashtags all around. There are benefits to having people at every level in medicine that look like us. This includes, but not limited to, patient satisfaction, comfort, promotion of cross-cultural competence, and improved mentorship and sponsorship. And we need to do our part in leveling the playing field. And so, as the saying says, if not us, then who? If not now, then when? And thank you for your time. I appreciate that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cannon. That was really an incredible journey you took us on with your personal experiences. I know that we all learned a lot, and you have been through so much to get to where you are, and we really appreciate you being so open with us.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you guys having me.
We have a little time that we have to fill to meet this 1 hour CME, at least till about another 10 minutes or so. Any questions from the audience that you would like to ask Dr. Cannon? I'd like to ask, how did you find that inner strength to just persevere when you did not have that support system and role models in the beginning?
I think for me, a lot of it was looking back. Like I said, during the years in which I was home in my community, home in my environment, pregnant, oftentimes ashamed, no picture taking, didn't want somebody to see my belly, things like that. I thought back on all of those times of, just proving them wrong. Like, that was my motivation, proving that just because this happened didn't make me a different person and didn't mean that I couldn't achieve my dreams. And that was honestly my constant daily motivation of not giving up. Halfway along the way, though, it became more about my love for what I was doing, my desire to just achieve that goal. But in the very beginning of all of that, it was a daily struggle to just keep my head up, to remind myself every day that if I went back home, if I gave up, that I was sort of somewhat of a failure. And so, like I said, there were things that I hid from my family along the way. If my mom called and asked how I was doing, I was always doing great. Even if I was sleeping on the floor and getting food out of bread lines, it was wonderful, because I never would I admit that I, left the home that I was raised in into a worse environment, right? And I think that along the way, as you find that you can actually do it. I mean, when I got, the dean's list in my community college, honestly, that was a shock to me too. I thought that would be a daily struggle, and parts of it were. I learned to overcome embarrassment. I raised my hand 1,000 times in class if I had to. Didn't matter how stupid the question was. I was not leaving that room until I understood what was happening. And oftentimes that meant that I stayed after and went to office hours after work, and I hired tutors and I did what I needed to do. But in the end, once you realize that you can do it, when you become the actual tutor after being tutored for so long, and you realize that your grades are good enough and you're actually good enough to do this, that becomes the motivation in and of itself.
Excellent. I think there's a few questions. Dr. Nanda?
Yes. So Rhonda is asking, do you feel that your real life experiences of being so challenged at a young age and countless struggles has made you a better physician and able to relate to your patients on a different level?
I think so. I think all of it, being a former nurse, being somebody who wasn't seen, being somebody who of a low socioeconomic status, being Black and underrepresented. I think all of that makes me see my patients in a different light. I can talk to people on a different level because I know where they're coming from. I can ask deeper questions and not be afraid to ask those questions because I've been there, and I can kind of think about the things that are going through their head. I take care of a lot of cancer patients. For head and neck, that's my duty now. And a lot of those people are in their 50s and 60s who develop tongue and throat cancer from smoking and alcoholism. And a lot of those patients literally come from backgrounds of nothing. And so I don't mind having to ask people, who's your family, who's your support system, you know, is somebody able to come to your visits with you, arranging for things for them. And so I think that all of that stuff plays a role because I know what it's like. And I know that people won't necessarily divulge that information, that you have to be comfortable asking that. I still don't mind, you know, wiping bottoms and cleaning patients with baths. If I go in the room and somebody's on the commode, I don't have to call anybody to come in and help me get them off the commode. I'll grab a rag and clean them up and put them back in bed, because that's the background that I've come from. And so I do think that I see my role in medicine just a little bit different, and hopefully that helps me see my patients in a different way. And on the flip side, that helps me mentor more. I have a network of students who just from one person or the other get my phone number and reach out to me. I just got a message yesterday from a former resident who said, hey, I have this guy who wants to do ENT. He's an African-American. He has great board scores. They always want me to know that that's the thing. And he thinks he wants to come to Duke. Can you mentor him? And so I think that also helps me along the way, because so many people help me along the way that it's part of my drive to actually get that out to the community. Yes, you can do this. Yes, let's come up with a plan. Let's make this happen. And that all of that stuff is just very important to me.
Thank you. We have another question from Dr. Papik. What do you think academic institutions can, and should do to recruit more women and underrepresented minorities as faculty?
I think they have to be intentional. I think we do a lot of talking about recruitment. We talk a lot about diversity, equity, inclusion. And for most people, that includes forming a committee and doing things in the community, but never actually following through with the recruitment. So I'm going to give you an example of something that's happening very recently. I have a student who wants to do ENT. She's phenomenal. CV is just outstanding. She has one flaw. She has a low board score. Both step 1 and step 2 are low. At the time of her step 1 board score, she was pregnant, and she had just recently lost her father. But she took step 2 early and sadly did not do much better. And so despite having an outstanding CV, I mean, when you interview her, she's a dream. She didn't match. She decided I can tell you that one program that interviewed her that I'm aware of had her ranked to match. They interviewed her knowing that her board scores were low. They had her ranked to match within the top. They're doing their rank list, and they bump her down. And the reason why they bumped her down was because they cited her board score. Well, in my opinion, if you knew her board score before you came in there and every person who interviewed her thought she deserved a spot, why bump her down just because of the score that you knew about when you decided to do the interview? And that's what I see all the time. I see it time after time after time. And I can tell you that in places where I feel like I have a strong voice, I can reach up and tilt the scales in that person's favor. But oftentimes I am the only person fighting for that person to get a spot, and it's exhausting. They have to be intentional. You have to put your money where your mouth is. That's what Dr. Pillsbury did at UNC. He had a desire and a goal to increase the numbers. So when he looked at spots. He basically would look and determine, well, we have, X number of people in the top 10, and why do we have all young white men in the top 3 spots right here? Who else can we shift around to get the class that we want? And he was never wrong. And so I think that we need a little bit more of that, a little bit more of people actually meaning what they say when they're going to say that they're going to be inclusive. And then the other half of it is that you can't just bring them in and forget about them. You have to bring them in and you have to actually see them, help to understand where they are. One of the things I liked about my job at Oklahoma is my former boss and chairman, Greg Krimple, saw me. When I was there for a couple of months, he brought me into the office and he said, have you made friends yet? How's the community going? Who can we get you? He knew that if I wasn't going to be happy in my personal life, that I probably wouldn't stick around in that job very long. And so he did everything in his power to make sure that I was seen and represented. And so I think that if you're going to bring them in, you have to actually see them and understand their background and their culture and what you need to do in order to make them feel inclusive.
Yes, amazing. Got to put your money where your mouth is.
Yes.
I had a question about just being a resident and having many medical students ask me about how to get to where I am. And they're having many doubts about it. And I guess I want to know, how do you actually convince someone, they have to do this themselves mostly, but how do you convince someone that they really can achieve what they want to achieve through like grit, like you said, and perseverance, and just making those connections instead of kind of talking themselves out of it?
I think most of the time it involves pointing out things that they have already accomplished, but they don't see in themselves. The reality is that most of the people who want to do it have the ability to do it. But they doubt themselves for obvious reasons. Maybe somebody told them that it wasn't possible. Maybe they're not seeing other people that look like them. Maybe somebody pointed out the one thing, like their board scores, that will keep them back, but they might have to think about other alternatives. So if they're truly lacking in something, then we just find ways to bring them up to the same level as everybody else around them. If they're lacking research, I might say, hey, your CV is strong, you're great, you're a good applicant, but you are missing these 2 things. Let's figure out how to get you there. If their CV is super strong and they deserve a spot, then it's mostly just trying to convince them that despite everything that they heard, they will get a spot if they're that good. And I just think it's just trying to find the ways to help them understand. You often have to talk about your own personal experience. I talk about myself. I'm not ashamed to tell people that I barely got a spot. I'm not ashamed to tell people that my board scores were low, or that I was, I did all of these things. I can tell you that the very first time that I stood up at a national meeting and talked about having a low board score and only getting 6 interviews, people would come up to me and talk to me about my bravery and divulging that. It was just such an interesting experience, because I know a lot of people who sometimes, I have colleagues who went through the match process 2 and 3 times. They would never say that in public. I think part of what we have to do to help people understand is that we're not all perfect. We weren't all the top of our class. We weren't all the first match. We weren't all the first at every major accomplishment. There are plenty of people who are doing excellent work at universities who may have not done so well on their MCATs, or may have had a low board score, or may not have matched the first time around. And I think if we actually make that normal for people to understand that, just because you did one minor thing in your career doesn't mean that you are set back for the rest of your life. I think that people will have a better understanding of what they can achieve sort of in the future.
Right. And I think that one of the things that you're really bringing to the table with being so honest is breaking those very formal barriers that old academic institutions have, where they don't reveal vulnerability in any circumstance. And the whole doctor is the God and the, you know, instead of being on the same level as the patients and coming up with a plan together. So I really appreciate your story as well. It's wonderful.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate again you guys having me. Great discussion.
We have just one more, and I also had a question, and it's something that you had shared with me. I think it was when you were here, but just as dermatology is one of the least diverse specialties, so is ENT. And I know that you have experienced discrimination within your own specialty, and many times from patients.
Mm-hmm.
Can you share with us some of what you've experienced?
Yeah, so, you know, when I took my job at Oklahoma, it's a very busy, we are one of the busiest cancer centers around that area. So saw patients of all backgrounds, and I would meet a patient. I thought we had a great connection. We would, you know, talk about the plan. I often have, you know, send them for their test and bring them back a week later so we could discuss. And these patients were extremely important to me. So I would be looking out for them, be like, oh, Mr. Such and Such didn't come back. Why didn't Mr. Such and Such come back? Oh my God, I hope he didn't, you know, something didn't happen, or he wasn't able to get side, you know, look up their chart and pull their name up. Oh, and they saw Dr. Krempel. And then I'd be like, why did they see Dr. Krempel, you know? And the reason why, I would ask Dr. Krempel and he would say they wanted to see somebody else. They didn't want to see a Black person. And so you would think that you had this major connection to somebody, and then all of a sudden they were gone because of who you were, the color of your skin. And I experienced that so many times at OU that it just became, sometimes it becomes a little bit disheartening, that you have so much care and compassion and they just don't want to see you. And you know, and like I said, I did a whole part of my talk was people feel comfortable seeing people like them. So I get that, you know, but it is a little bit sad to have patients just turn away from you strictly, not because you're a bad doctor, not because you're not doing right by them, but strictly because of the color of your skin. On the flip side, I literally all the time have patients who literally tell me in my first sentence of walking through the door that they sought me out particularly because I was a Black woman. They did all their research and they chose me because of that reason. So I get it, but it is kind of sad sometimes. I can't hear
You're
you.
muted, Dr. Allen.
Oh, I was trying to read this very last question, sorry. As a non-traditional dermatology applicant applying this year, I'm wondering how much of my story to get to where I am to put into my personal statement. Do you have any advice on how much of the personal statement to focus on your background versus goals and work in dermatology?
I think you should talk about yourself, about who you are as a person, while you weave that into the narrative of why you want to do what you want to do. And there are definitely ways to weave your story into that narrative. I got to tell you, at least from my own personal perspective, and I can only talk about myself, is that when I read the traditional ENT applicants, you know, their story, most of them say the exact same thing. Oh, I want to do an ENT because it's a combination of, you know, surgery and medicine, and you work with people of all ages. And you don't really learn anything about that person from that story. And so I think that you should talk about yourself and talk about your journey. I think people will see you then and understand where you're coming from. They might be able to put some of the things on your CV and your application into perspective because they understand who you are. I mean, you don't have to drop every bit about yourself in there and only share what you're comfortable sharing, but don't be afraid to share your story. I think it will make you stand out as an applicant if you're actually personalizing your story along with their journey and your path to medicine. You're muted.
You have 30 seconds to answer this quick question. Do you have an opinion about telling patients they cannot change docs because of race of the doctor?
Well, I actually think that I let them switch. because the doctor-patient relationship is very personal. They have to trust me. Now, there are times when I'm in that room that I'm able to bring around that trust. Like if I can sense in the room that, something's off, then I will ask them personally, what's wrong? Talk to me. And then, we can get, most of the time, if I can sense it in the room and understand, we get through that and we become the best of friends during that relationship and understand each other. It's those colleagues who have left you and you didn't know why they left until a week or two later, that I don't reach back out to them, because I think that that's such a trusting relationship, that if something happens and they didn't trust me in the first place enough to stick with me, and there's something happens, a surgery has a complication that's an expected complication, for example, then they're going to be sad that they chose the wrong person. So I let those people leave if they don't feel comfortable with me. Not that I just want all my patients to walk away, but I do let them leave if they are not comfortable.
Thank you, Dr. Cannon. This has been a wonderful hour of inspiration. I think you've touched on a lot of areas that many of us can agree with, and we hope for you to come back again. We thank you for all of that you've done. We've tried to do this for 3 years in a row.
Yes.
And so we're so happy that you came on this day, this symposium, because your story has woven in perfectly with many of the other talks that we've had today. So thank you so much.